I stood at the back of my brother's Navy SEAL ceremony, hidden in plain sight, letting them believe I was nothing. They didn't know I was a colonel in Air Force, special operations carrying secrets I could never tell, fighting battles they'd never see. Then the commanding admiral locked eyes with me, and everything I'd hidden threatened to shatter in front of them all. Have you ever been judged by your family for who they think you are while hiding who you really are? My name is Ava Halston. I'm 35 and this is my story. I stood at the back of St. Twelfth Andrew's Chapel in Coronado, clutching the strap of my plain black purse so tight that my knuckles turned white. The air smelled like polished wood and salt drifting in from the bay, and the pews were packed with proud families leaning forward to catch a glimpse of their sons. My family was in the second row, close enough to the stage to hear every word, to see every medal pinned on crisp navy whites. They didn't see me. My brother Mason was standing up there, 30 years old, tall, strong, a newly minted Navy SEAL with a smile that could make my mother cry with pride. I saw Dad's shoulders straighten when Mason's name was called, saw Mom dab at the corners of her eyes with a tissue, saw their friends lean in to congratulate them softly. I adjusted the sleeves of my navy blue cardigan, the same one I wore to every family event, so they wouldn't comment on my clothes. It was the uniform of someone who blended in, someone who worked an insurance job in downtown San Diego, someone who was easy to ignore. Lily, you made it. My mother's voice still rang in my head from the night before, the way she had sounded surprised when I confirmed I would attend. She hadn't meant to hurt me, but it was there, hidden in the way her eyes shifted when she looked at me, then back at Mason. Dad used to tell his Navy friends, Lily has a sharp mind, but she doesn't have the discipline for service. They would nod politely, glance at me, then continue talking about deployments and strategy, the conversation never truly including me. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know about the mornings I ran before sunrise, the nights I fell asleep over textbooks on naval tactics, the day I received my acceptance letter to the Naval Academy with perfect scores, and how Dad's rare hug that day had made me. I believe I was finally enough. I thought back to that moment, now the way he had squeezed my shoulder and said, "Don't waste this opportunity." His voice was gruff, but I could see the pride in his eyes, the hope that I would follow in his footsteps, that I would carry the Halston name with honor. And I did. For a while. Until the day I walked away and they decided I had failed them. They didn't know why. They didn't know that I had been pulled into a different world, one that required absolute silence and sacrifice, a world that demanded I let them believe I had quit, that I wasn't strong enough, that I wasn't them. The organ music played softly as Mason stood at attention, receiving his trident, his face composed, his posture perfect. Dad's hand rested on Mom's back as she sniffed, whispering to him, "He's made us so proud." I felt the familiar burn in my chest, the one that came every time they looked through me, every time they praised Mason while pretending I wasn't there. I wanted to clap for my brother, to cheer for him, but my hands wouldn't move. I wanted to walk up to Dad and tell him I was proud too, that I understood what it meant to serve, but my feet stayed rooted to the back of the chapel. I let a small smile cross my lips for Mason's sake, watching him stand tall under the California sun streaming through the stained glass, his eyes scanning the crowd for familiar faces. He wouldn't look back here. There was no reason for him to. A family in front of me cheered loudly, and for a moment the noise drowned out everything else. The pride, the joy, the laughter that filled the air, it all pressed against me like a weight I couldn't shake. I swallowed hard, shifting the strap on my shoulder, forcing myself to take a breath. It was just another day of pretending. Another day of letting them believe what they wanted to believe. I had made peace with that, or at least I thought I had. But as Mason stepped down from the stage, shaking hands with his commanders, I felt something crack quietly inside me, something I had kept locked away for too long. I had spent years wishing I could tell them the truth, but the truth could be more dangerous than any lie I had ever told. I stepped outside as the ceremony ended, letting the warm breeze hit my face, carrying the smell of salt and freshly cut grass from the nearby training field. Families gathered in clusters, hugging, laughing, taking photos to capture the pride of the day. I watched as Dad shook hands with Mason's commanding officer, clapping Mason on the back with that grin he saved for moments of real pride. Mom stood beside Mason, fixing the collar on his uniform, tears shining in her eyes as she spoke softly to him. I could imagine what she was saying, how proud she was, how he was everything she had hoped for in a son. I watched as Mason nodded, leaning down to kiss her cheek, his eyes scanning the crowd, stopping for a moment as they found mine. Our eyes met, and for a split second his smile faltered. He lifted his hand slightly, a small wave, but it was enough to make my chest tighten. I raised my hand back just for a moment before dropping it to my side. Mason turned back to Dad, who was already pulling him into another conversation with a retired officer in a crisp blue blazer, laughter rumbling between them. I could have walked over, could have joined them, but I didn't. I stayed where I was, blending into the edge of the crowd like I had learned to do so well. The last thing I wanted was to see that flicker of pity in Dad's eyes when he saw me standing there. "Excuse me," a woman said as she brushed past me, holding her phone high to record her son walking by in uniform. I stepped back, pressing myself closer to the brick wall, clutching my purse like it was the only anchor I had. I thought about the nights I lay awake listening to the hum of the city outside my apartment, wondering if they ever missed me when they were all together sharing stories, laughing about things I was never there to witness. I thought about the conversations I heard only in pieces when I came home for holidays, the way Dad would lower his voice when the topic turned to me, how Mom would force a smile and change the subject. They had accepted the lie because it was easier than asking questions. Easier than facing the truth they didn't want to know. "Lily," a voice called, and I turned, startled to see Mason jogging over, his white uniform sharp against the bright California sky. He stopped a few feet away, shifting on his heels, glancing back at our parents before looking at me. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, his voice quiet, almost unsure. "I wouldn't miss it," I managed, forcing a smile that felt tight around the edges. He nodded, looking down at his hands for a moment before meeting my eyes again. "It means a lot," he said, and I could see the genuine gratitude there, the relief that at least I had shown up, even if he didn't know what it had cost me. "You deserve it," I said, swallowing the bitterness that rose when I saw the trident pinned to his chest, the symbol of everything our family valued, everything I had once dreamed of before my life had taken a turn I couldn't explain. "You look good," he said, awkward, unsure, his eyes scanning the crowd again. "Thanks," I replied softly, shifting my purse to my other shoulder. We stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the crowd swelling around us, people shouting congratulations, children laughing as they played tag around the adults' legs. "Mom and Dad would love to see you," Mason said, glancing back again, and I could see the hesitation in his eyes, the fear that I would say no. "I know," I said, and for a moment I almost stepped forward. Almost. But I didn't. "I should go," I said, instead, forcing my feet to move backward, away from him, away from the crowd that felt like it was suffocating me. "Lily," he started, but I shook my head. "Congratulations, Mason." "I'm proud of you," I said, and I meant it. I meant every word, even if it hurt. He stood there watching me, confusion and hurt crossing his face before he nodded, forcing a small smile. "Thanks, Lily," he said quietly. I turned before I could change my mind, weaving through the crowd, past the balloons and the photographers, past the proud parents and the cheering siblings, until I stepped out into the sunlight and the quiet that came with leaving it all behind. As I reached my car, I looked back one last time, seeing Dad clap Mason on the back, Mom wiping another tear from her eyes. Mason looking around, searching for me in the crowd before giving up. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, letting out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. I had spent years wishing I could tell them the truth, wishing I could explain why I walked away, why I had to let them believe I was a failure. But the truth could be more dangerous than any lie I had ever told. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. They thought I quit. The truth was, I was chosen for a path they could never imagine. It happened during my third year at the Naval Academy, a cold January morning when the Chesapeake wind cut through my uniform as I ran before sunrise. I was 21, top of my class, focused on the future I thought I wanted. Every mile I ran, every textbook I studied was to prove to my father that I was worthy of the Halston name. That morning after PT, two men in civilian clothes were waiting near the track. They asked for Lily Halston, and when I raised my hand, they told me to follow. We walked to a small conference room in Bancroft Hall where a woman in an Air Force uniform waited, her hair pulled back tight, eyes sharp. She introduced herself as Colonel Mendez, told me they had been observing my performance, my aptitude in strategic simulations, my ability to see patterns where others saw chaos. She slid a folder across the table. Black cover, no markings, just my name on a white label. You have the skill set we need, Cadet Halston, she said. But if you accept, you leave today, and you leave quietly. I remember staring at her, confusion tightening my chest. Leave the academy, it will appear that you quit, that you couldn't handle it, she said, her eyes never leaving mine. It's the only way this works. I thought about my father's face when he hugged me the day I got in. My mother's eyes when she told her friends her daughter was going to be an officer. I thought about Mason, how he looked up to me, how he believed I was unbreakable. And if I say no, I asked. She leaned back, folding her hands. You'll graduate, take your commission, and serve well, no doubt. But if you say yes, you'll be serving in a way that changes the world, even if no one ever knows. I took the folder that night to my dorm room, read every page under the thin light above my desk. Blacked out lines, vague mission descriptions, promises of something bigger than medals and ceremonies. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I reported back to Colonel Mendez. I'm in, I said, my voice steady, even as my stomach flipped. She nodded once. You won't regret this, Halston. They let me pack a single bag. I left a letter on my pillow for my roommate to find, telling her I was sorry that I had to go. By the time the academy sent the notice to my parents that I had withdrawn, I was already on a plane to Nevada. Creech Air Force Base felt like another planet. The air was dry, the mountains sharp against the blue sky, the sun unrelenting. I traded my navy blues for Air Force fatigues, learning to blend in with a world that didn't exist on paper. Training was relentless. Morning started at 0400 with ruck marches through the desert, lungs burning from the cold. Afternoons spent in windowless rooms decoding satellite feeds, memorizing tactics for missions I couldn't ask questions about. Nights spent running drills, my body screaming for rest, my mind forcing it to keep going. It was there that I met Major Riley Brooks. 38 tall, with graying hair under his cap and eyes that missed nothing. He didn't talk much at first, watching us as we struggled through the first weeks. One evening after a grueling field exercise, I was sitting alone by the barracks dirt, streaking my arms, my head in my hands. I was trying to breathe, trying to remember why I chose this. You think you're alone in this, a voice said. I looked up to see Riley standing there, his hands in his pockets, the desert wind tugging at his sleeves. I didn't think I managed my throat dry. You'll learn that's the first mistake we all make, he said, sitting down across from me on the steps. Thinking this is about us. He didn't say anything else for a moment, just let the wind whistle between us, the sun setting behind the ridgeline. When it gets hard, remember this, he said, leaning forward. There will come a day when you don't need to explain yourself to anyone. The truth will speak for itself, Halston. I didn't know then how much I would hold on to those words, or how many nights I would whisper them to myself when the silence of being forgotten felt heavier than any mission I had ever carried. I pulled my knees to my chest, resting my chin on them, watching as the last light disappeared behind the desert hills, wondering if my family was sitting down to dinner talking about Mason, pretending I never existed. I learned to live in silence at Creech, to carry the weight of what I couldn't say. My days were a blur of coded briefings, advanced tactical simulations, and intelligence processing under pressure that never let up. We would be woken in the middle of the night, alarms blaring, ordered to analyze satellite images for patterns that could save lives or prevent attacks before dawn. I learned to see the world in layers, every movement, every shadow, telling a story if you looked closely enough. Riley was there through it all. He would stand behind me during simulations, watching as I pieced together fragments of intercepted communications. I could feel his presence, the silent nod when I cracked a sequence no one else saw. You have a mind built for this, he told me once, his voice low so only I could hear. Don't waste time wishing for a normal life when you were never meant for one. I stopped calling home after the first few months. There was nothing I could say without lying, nothing they would understand. Mom would leave voicemails, her voice soft, asking if I was eating enough, if I needed money, if I was happy. Dad rarely called, but when he did, it was always the same. Lily, you should come home from Mason's ceremony, he would say. It would mean a lot to him. It never sounded like it would mean anything to him. I would sit on my bunk after training, phone in my hand, listening to the message again before deleting it, pressing the screen until the light went dark. Riley found me like that one night, the phone still in my hand, my eyes unfocused. "Family?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. "Yeah," I said, my voice tight. He studied me for a moment before stepping into the room, closing the door behind him. "You know what the hardest part of this job is?" he asked, pulling up a chair across from me. "What?" I asked, tired. "Letting them believe you're less than you are," he said, folding his arms. "It's easier for them. It's safer for the work. But it doesn't get easier for you." I looked down at my hands, the small scars from weapons training, the bruises from grappling drills that would take weeks to fade. "I thought it would," I admitted. He nodded once. "It won't. But you learn to live with it." There was a long silence before he spoke again, his voice softer. "When you're out there and it's just you, the mission and the choice between doing the right thing and staying alive, you'll know it was worth it," he said. "And one day when the time is right, you won't need to say a word. They'll see it." I didn't know if I believed him then, but I held on to that promise like a lifeline. We trained for months before I was deployed on my first operation, a low-visibility extraction in Eastern Europe. Riley was there briefing the team, reminding us of the stakes, reminding us of the silence we would carry back with us. "You good, Halston?" he asked, as I checked my gear before boarding the plane. "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. The mission was brutal, fast, cold. We moved through frozen streets under moonlight, pulling a target out from a safe house before dawn. Every step, every breath felt like glass in my lungs, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. When we returned, Riley handed me a coin, a small challenge coin with an eagle etched on it. "Don't lose it," he said. "You've earned it." That night, I lay on my bunk, the coin in my hand, listening to the silence around me. Outside, the Nevada wind howled across the empty desert, and I wondered if Mason was looking up at the same moon, if he was getting ready for his own missions, never knowing his sister was out there too. I didn't know how long I could keep living in their eyes as a failure, hiding everything I was becoming in the shadows, swallowing every truth I wanted to tell. But I did know one thing. I wasn't quitting. And I wasn't done. Have you ever had to let people believe the worst about you to protect something bigger? Share in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. While they thought I was working at an insurance office, I was leading rescue missions in the dark. They called it Tavros Operation. Syria, near the Turkish border, where children were being held in a crumbling building that had once been a school. Intelligence confirmed their location, but the window to extract them was closing fast. We flew in under moonlight, the rotors cutting through the cold desert air. I checked my gear, checked my weapon, ran the plan through my mind like a prayer. Riley was next to me, his eyes sharp even under the dim red light. "Stay sharp, Halston," he said, checking the straps on his vest. "No heroes tonight." "I hear you," I said, though we both knew we were walking into chaos. The landing was rough, dust and sand filling the night as we stepped onto Syrian soil. We moved fast, cutting through alleyways, each step measured, each shadow a potential threat. Gunfire echoed in the distance as we approached the building, the air thick with smoke and the sharp scent of burnt rubber. My heartbeat was steady, my focus locked on the mission, on the children inside who didn't even know we were coming for them. We breached the door, flashbangs lighting up the darkness, screams following as we cleared room after room. I heard Riley's voice in my earpiece, calm and direct, calling out positions, confirming our movements. I found them in the basement, huddled together, their eyes wide, faces smudged with dirt and fear. They couldn't have been older than 10. I knelt down, lowering my weapon. "You're safe now," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're getting you out." I led them out, shielding them as gunfire ripped through the air above us. Dust fell from the ceiling, screams echoing as we moved. I heard Riley shout behind me, a sharp curse followed by the crack of gunfire. I turned to see him go down, a spray of blood on the wall, his body hitting the ground hard. "Riley," I shouted, shoving one of the children toward another operator. I ran back, dropping to my knees, pressing my hand to the wound in his side. "Don't you dare," I hissed, pulling gauze from my pack, pressing it down hard. His eyes were open, pain flashing across his face. "Get them out." "Halston," he gasped. "Not leaving you," I said, my hands working, blood soaking through the gauze, hot and sticky against my gloves. The building shook as another explosion hit nearby, dust and debris falling around us. The radio crackled in my ear, calls for exfil for us to move, to leave. Move, Lily. Riley shouted, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. I looked at him, at the fear in his eyes, the fear not for himself but for the mission, for the kids, for me. I pressed another bandage down, securing it, and grabbed his vest. On 3, I said, my voice hard. I pulled him up, throwing his arm over my shoulders, dragging him as we moved toward the exit. Each step was a battle, each breath, a fight against the smoke and the screams. We made it to the extraction point as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. The children were loaded first, their small faces looking back at me as they were lifted into the helicopter. I helped Riley, and his grip tight on my vest as he pulled himself up. I climbed in last, the helicopter lifting off, the wind whipping around us as the ground fell away. I sat there covered in dust and blood, my hands shaking as I held onto the side of the chopper, watching the ground disappear, knowing we had done it, knowing we had saved them. But the cost was written in the blood drying on my hands, in the screams I would hear in my dreams, in the scar that would later stretch across my shoulder where a bullet had grazed me as we left. That night, while they celebrated Mason's birthday back home, laughing around a cake in the warm glow of their kitchen, I sat in a dark tent cleaning Riley's blood from under my nails, staring at the moon through the thin canvas. They were celebrating. And I was washing blood off my hands. I didn't sleep for days after Tavros. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the children's faces, their small hands clinging to my sleeves, the fear in their eyes when the building shook. I heard the gunfire, the ringing in my ears, Riley's voice yelling for me to move, the thick smell of blood and smoke stuck in my hair no matter how many times I washed it out. I was 29 when it happened, just 5 years into this life, already carrying more ghosts than I could count. The doctors patched Riley up, told him he was lucky, told him he would walk again if he followed orders. He only laughed, shaking his head as he laid in the hospital cot, IV lines taped to his arm. You dragged me out, he said, his voice, rough, eyes, tired but bright with that familiar fire. Don't make it sound like I had a choice, I replied, folding my arms, leaning against the wall. You did, he said, staring at me. You always have a choice. I looked away, my jaw tightening, remembering the screams, the children's cries, the gunfire that wouldn't leave my head. No, I didn't, I said, and he didn't argue. That night I sat alone outside the medical tent, the desert cold biting at my skin as I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to breathe through the pounding in my head. My body ached, the wound on my shoulder stitched and bandaged, a burning reminder of how close I came to not making it out. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it out, seeing the text from my mother. Don't forget Mason's birthday this Saturday, it read. It would be nice if you showed up for once. I stared at the screen, reading it over and over, the words digging into me deeper than the bullet that grazed me days before. For once. As if I hadn't been showing up every day, risking everything, giving everything for people who would never know my name, for a family that would never understand why I had to disappear. I typed out a reply, then deleted it. Typed it again, then deleted it. Finally, I locked the phone and shoved it back into my pocket, leaning back, letting the stars blur above me. Inside the tent, Riley's laughter echoed with another patient, his voice a small piece of normal in a world that never was. You can't tell them, he said the next morning as I helped him sit up, his arm in a sling, eyes serious. I know, I said. You think it would help, but it wouldn't, he said. They wouldn't get it. And it would only make you want their approval more. I looked at him, his words slicing deeper than he knew. I don't care what they think, I lied. He raised an eyebrow, a small smirk on his face. Yeah, you do, he said. But that's okay, it means you're still human. I swallowed, my throat tight, turning away to grab his water bottle. Your family thinks you're working an office job, right, he asked. Insurance, I said, shrugging. That's one hell of an insurance job, he chuckled, shaking his head. I cracked a small smile just for a second. That night I dreamt of the mission again, only this time I couldn't pull Riley up, couldn't get the kids out, couldn't make it to the helicopter in time. I woke up with my heart slamming in my chest, sweat soaking through my shirt, the edges of dawn breaking over the horizon. I walked outside, breathing in the cold air, the desert silent, except for the distant hum of generators. My phone buzzed again, a photo of Mason blowing out candles on a cake, Mom's caption reading, "Wish you were here." I clenched the phone in my hand, the image burning into my mind as I stood there, my other hand brushing against the stitches on my shoulder. They were eating cake, singing happy birthday, laughing around a kitchen table. And I was alone in the dark, wiping blood off my hands, trying to remember why I chose this. Have you ever had to let people think you're nothing while you fight battles they'll never see? What would you have done if you were me? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. My family asked me to show up, so I came with a fake smile and a truth I couldn't share. Thanksgiving in my parents' house smelled like cinnamon turkey and the faint scent of my mother's perfume. The table was set with the same orange and gold runner we had used since I was a kid, the plates lined up like soldiers waiting for inspection. I stood in the doorway, clutching a store-bought pie in my hands, forcing a smile as Mom rushed over, kissing my cheek. "Lily, you made it," she said, like she was surprised. "I said I would," I replied, handing her the pie. She took it, glancing at the label before placing it on the counter. She was already turning away, calling out to Mason as he walked in, tall and confident, wearing a navy fleece, his hair cut close, that easy grin on his face. "Hey Lily," he said, pulling me into a quick hug, smelling like cold air and soap. "Hey Mason," I said, my voice steady. He pulled back, looking over my shoulder as Dad walked in, clapping him on the back, ignoring me as he launched into a story about one of Mason's training ops. I moved to the kitchen, washing my hands, trying not to flinch as the water hit the scar on my shoulder, still tender when I pressed too hard. I pulled down my sleeve, flexing my fingers to stop them from shaking. "Lily, can you help with the plates?" Mom asked, not looking at me. "Yeah," I said, drying my hands, stacking the plates carefully. I carried them to the table, setting each one down, listening to Dad talk about Mason's latest qualification, about how proud he was that at least one of his kids had stayed the course. "At least one of our children didn't quit," he said, his voice light, but the words sharp enough to cut. I froze for a moment, my hands gripping the edge of the table, the scar on my shoulder throbbing under the fabric of my sweater. I forced myself to keep moving, placing the last plate down before stepping back. Melanie walked in then, my cousin, perfect as always, her blonde hair pulled back, wearing a crisp blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Lily, hi," she said, giving me a tight smile. "Still working at that insurance place, right? Must be nice, no stress." She didn't wait for me to answer before turning to Mason, her face lighting up. "And Mason, my God, you look amazing in uniform," she gushed, touching his arm lightly. "We're all so proud of you." I swallowed, the taste of bitterness sharp in my mouth. Mason glanced at me, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes, before he smiled at her. "Thanks, Mel," he said, his voice easy. I turned away, moving back to the kitchen, pulling my phone out, my hands trembling as I unlocked the screen. Riley's message popped up. "You okay?" it read. I stared at it, the words blurring for a moment. Still breathing, I typed back, then deleted it. I typed again. "Fine," I sent, pressing send before I could change my mind. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, taking a deep breath, letting the noise of the family fill the space around me. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the sound of the football game playing in the living room. Mom called us to the table, telling everyone to sit down to grab their wine glasses for a toast. I found a seat at the far end next to the window, where I could see the cold wind moving the bare branches outside, the sky darkening as the evening crept in. Dad stood lifting his glass, looking at Mason with that same pride I remembered from years ago. "To Mason," he said, his voice strong. "For making us proud." Everyone raised their glasses, clinking them together, smiling, the glow of the lights reflecting off the wine. I lifted mine, forcing a smile, feeling the scar on my shoulder burn under my sweater as I moved. I couldn't tell them that while they cut the pie, while they laughed and cheered Mason's accomplishments, I was somewhere else, dragging children out of illegal prisons, running through gunfire, saving lives they would never know existed. I couldn't tell them. And that was the hardest part. The plates clattered as Mom began serving slices of turkey, her voice light, telling Mason to take more, telling Melanie how glad she was to see her again. The smell of rosemary and butter mixed with the faint scent of the candles burning on the table. I passed the mashed potatoes to Mason, our hands brushing for a moment, and he looked at me, really looked at me before looking away. I wondered if he ever questioned why I was so quiet, why I never talked about work, why I avoided questions with practiced ease. "Lily, you're awfully quiet tonight," Melanie said, taking a sip of her wine, her eyes sharp as she tilted her head. You must have some fun stories from your office. Or is it just paperwork and phone calls all day? I forced a small laugh, pushing a piece of turkey around my plate. Mostly paperwork, I said, my voice even. Must be nice, she replied, her smile tight. Not having to worry about deadlines that actually matter. Mason cleared his throat, shifting in his chair, but said nothing. Dad leaned back, folding his arms across his chest, looking at me. Your mother tells me you're still at that insurance place, he said, his tone casual, but the weight of the words pressed into me like a stone. You ever think about doing something different? Something with purpose? I swallowed the fork heavy in my hand, the scar on my shoulder pulsing under my sweater. I like what I do, I lied. Dad nodded slowly, taking a sip of his drink, his eyes sliding back to Mason. Well, at least one of my kids stuck it out, he said, raising his glass again. The silence that followed was loud, pressing against my ears, making the room feel too small. Mom looked down at her plate, her fork trembling slightly, but she didn't say a word. I took a sip of water, letting it cool the burn in my throat, letting it wash down the anger that was bubbling, the urge to scream the truth into the air to force them to see me. I looked at Mason, who was staring at his plate, his jaw tight, his hand gripping his fork. For a moment, his eyes met mine, something flickering there, something like regret, before he looked away. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out under the table, angling the screen away as I read Riley's message. Hang in there, it said. 2 words, but they were enough. I typed back, my fingers trembling. Trying, I sent, locking the phone before slipping it back into my pocket. Mom started talking about Christmas plans, about decorating the house, about Mason coming home for a few days, about how nice it would be to have everyone together. Everyone. I pushed my chair back quietly, standing up, collecting a few empty plates to take to the kitchen. I'll help, Mason said, standing up as well, grabbing a few glasses. We walked into the kitchen, the noise of the dining room fading behind us. The water ran as I started rinsing the plates, the steam rising around us. You don't have to take it, Mason said, quietly setting the glasses down. I didn't look at him. It's fine, I said. It's not, he said, his voice low. Dad shouldn't have said that. I turned off the water, setting a plate down, carefully wiping my hands on a towel. It's not your fault, I said, finally looking at him. He opened his mouth, then closed it, shaking his head. You're here, he said. That counts for something. I wanted to tell him that being here was the hardest thing I had done in months, that it was easier to run into gunfire than to sit at that table and listen to them praise him while pretending I didn't exist. But I didn't. I nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, I said. It does. We stood there for a moment, the hum of the dishwasher filling the silence, the voices from the dining room drifting through the doorway. And I couldn't tell them that while they were cutting pie and pouring coffee, I had been halfway across the world, pulling children out of illegal prisons, dragging wounded teammates to safety, stitching wounds in the dark while praying they wouldn't die. I couldn't tell them. And I didn't know how much longer I could keep it in. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. The day Ethan received his SEAL Trident was the day I planned to disappear into the crowd one more time. Coronado was bright that morning, the California sun sharp against the ocean breeze, flags snapping in the wind. Families were everywhere, hugging sons in uniform, snapping photos, laughter mixing with the distant cries of seagulls. I stood at the back wearing a plain black jacket and jeans, hair pulled back, sunglasses hiding tired eyes. I kept my hands in my pockets, rolling the edge of the scar on my shoulder between my fingers as I watched. Mom was near the front, her navy dress, pressed hair curled, dabbing tears from her eyes with a small tissue. Dad stood beside her, his posture straight, a hint of his old Navy bearing in the way he stood with his hands behind his back. They were smiling at Ethan, who stood in formation with the others, the gold SEAL Trident pinned to his chest, his face serious, proud. He glanced up once, scanning the crowd, but his eyes moved past me, not stopping, not seeing. That was safer anyway. I had promised Riley I would keep my distance. If they see you, if the wrong person recognizes you, you might have to leave immediately, he had said, his voice low over the phone the night before. I know, I told him, looking out the window of my small apartment, the city lights blurring in the darkness. I won't let it happen. I meant it too. I didn't plan to stay long, just enough to see Ethan receive the pin, to watch Mom's hand fly to her mouth, to see Dad's eyes soften, to know that at least one of us was giving them the moment they wanted. A man stepped up to the podium, the medals on his uniform glinting in the sun. His voice carried over the crowd as he spoke of honor, sacrifice, and brotherhood. I recognized him instantly, the way he stood, the way he paused before each word. Admiral Carter. 56, steel gray hair eyes that saw everything, a voice that could calm chaos with a single command. He had once led a joint operation I was part of years ago under a different sky, with dust and heat and gunfire so loud it made your bones shake. I felt my stomach tighten, my breath catching for a moment as I shifted, stepping behind a taller man in front of me, ducking my head slightly, hoping the sunglasses and distance would be enough. He shouldn't have been here. I shouldn't have been here. The ceremony continued, the applause rolling across the lawn as the SEAL candidates stepped forward one by one, receiving their pins. I clapped softly, keeping my head down, heart beating too fast, the breeze feeling cold against the sweat on my neck. Ethan stepped forward, his name echoing across the speakers. Mom let out a small cry, her hands pressed to her lips, Dad's hand gripping her shoulder. Ethan stood tall, the pin pressed onto his uniform, his eyes blinking rapidly as he nodded to the Admiral. They turned to face the crowd, the families cheering, the instructors clapping, camera flashes lighting up the morning. I took one step back, then another, easing toward the edge of the gathering, ready to slip away before the families began to gather around their sons, before someone might turn and look too closely. Then Admiral Carter's eyes swept the crowd. They paused. They narrowed. And they stopped. Right on me. My pulse roared in my ears as Admiral Carter's eyes locked on mine. I lowered my head, turning my shoulder, hoping he would look away, hoping the distance and the years would keep me invisible. He didn't look away. Instead, he paused mid-sentence, his mouth still open, his eyes narrowing in sharp recognition. My stomach dropped, heat flashing across my skin as I took another step back, scanning for the fastest way to the parking lot. People around me kept clapping, oblivious, their eyes fixed on the stage, on the ceremony, on their sons and brothers becoming SEALs. I could feel the wind shift, carrying the Admiral's voice back to the microphone as he cleared his throat, forcing himself to continue, but I saw the glance he threw my way again before he turned back to Ethan. I turned, moving faster now, weaving through the edges of the crowd, keeping my head down, my breath short, the taste of panic sharp in my mouth. I slipped behind a row of parked cars, pulling out my phone, dialing Riley's number without thinking. He picked up on the second ring. "Tell me you're out," he said, voice calm but clipped. "Not yet," I whispered, ducking as a family passed by, balloons tied to the stroller, laughter bubbling around me like static. "What happened?" he asked. "He saw me," I said, pressing my hand against the car door to steady myself. "Admiral Carter. He saw me." Riley went quiet for a moment, then let out a slow breath. "Get to your car," he said. "Now." "I'm trying," I said, peeking around the edge of the car, seeing more families moving toward the stage for pictures. I slipped between two trucks, my boots crunching on the gravel, my heart pounding so loud I was sure someone would hear it. I could still see Ethan at the front, hugging Mom, Dad's hand on his back, the perfect family moment unfolding as if nothing else existed. I was almost to the exit when I heard it. Colonel Halston. His voice was calm, measured, carrying across the breeze like a command I couldn't ignore. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing, my breath catching, as I turned slowly, sunglasses slipping down my nose, letting me see him clearly. Admiral Carter stood there, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sharp, the same look he had worn years ago when we briefed before dawn, planning the impossible missions no one would ever know about. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice loud enough to catch the attention of those nearby. A few heads turned, eyes flicking between us, curiosity lighting in their faces, whispers starting. My mouth went dry, the world tilting, as I saw my father turn, confusion flickering across his face, Mom's hand pausing in midair as she looked back, Ethan's eyes following theirs until they found me. And in that single breath, the life I had kept hidden, the silence I had held onto for so long, cracked wide open. The crowd around us went quiet. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. I used to fear this moment. But now it was here. Admiral Carter's words hung in the air, sharp and clear, cutting through the noise of the crowd like a blade. Colonel Halston. A ripple of confusion moved through the families nearby. A few people turned, whispering, their eyes darting between me and the Admiral. My father's head snapped around, his eyes narrowing, confusion pulling at the corners of his mouth. Colonel, he echoed, his voice rough. You must be mistaken, Admiral. Admiral Carter didn't flinch. His gaze stayed on me, steady, unblinking. I'm not mistaken, he said. Your daughter has saved more lives than you can imagine. She's led teams into places most won't even speak about. She's pulled out men who are as good as dead, including teammates your son trained with. I felt the world tilt, the breeze cold on my face as the blood rushed in my ears. My father opened and closed his mouth, his jaw working as he looked from the Admiral back to me. Mom's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide, the color draining from her face. Ethan stood frozen still in his uniform, the trident on his chest glinting in the sunlight. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came out. His eyes were locked on me, the realization crashing through him like a wave he couldn't fight. Lily, he finally managed, his voice cracking, the single word carrying every question he couldn't form. I swallowed, the taste of dust and regret sharp on my tongue. My hands were shaking at my sides, and I curled them into fists, feeling the scar on my shoulder pull tight under the fabric of my jacket. I looked at the Admiral, then at my family, at Ethan's pale, stunned face. This was the moment I had tried to avoid, the truth I had buried under years of silence and sacrifice. And I was done hiding. My father shook his head once, as if trying to clear it. Admiral, I don't understand, he said, his voice low, controlled, the way he always spoke when he was trying to keep order. Mom's eyes darted between us, her lips trembling, her hand gripping the small cross necklace at her throat. What is he talking about, Lily? She whispered, her voice breaking on my name. The Admiral shifted his weight, glancing at the stunned families around us before stepping closer, lowering his voice, but not enough for it to be private. Your daughter is a colonel in Air Force Special Operations, he said, his tone gentle but firm. She's been serving in classified missions for years. Her work has saved countless lives, including Navy personnel. Dad's face went pale, the sun catching the sweat on his forehead as he blinked hard, like he couldn't process the words. That can't be, he said, shaking his head again, his voice softer now, almost pleading. She left the academy. She works insurance. I looked at him, my father, who had spent years believing I was a disappointment, who had looked through me at family dinners, who had measured worth in ranks and medals. I opened my mouth, then closed it, the words sticking to the back of my throat. Ethan took a step forward, his boots crunching on the gravel, his hands clenched at his sides. Lily, he said again. His voice stronger this time, confusion and something else in his eyes, something like hope. Is it true? I met his eyes, seeing the boy who used to follow me around the backyard, who had looked up to me before everything changed, before silence became the only way I could protect them. Yes, I said, the word coming out soft, but it felt like a shout in the heavy quiet around us. Mom made a small sound, her hand covering her mouth again as her eyes filled with tears. Dad took a step back, his hand going to the back of his neck, rubbing it slowly as he looked at the ground. I don't understand, he murmured. The Admiral cleared his throat, giving me a look that told me he had said enough, that the rest was mine to carry now. I took a deep breath, the breeze lifting strands of hair around my face, the sounds of the ocean in the distance grounding me as I finally looked at all of them. For the first time in years, I let them see me, really see me, without the armor of silence and false smiles. It was the first time I saw my father's hands tremble when he looked at me. Ethan's eyes were still locked on mine, searching for answers. All this time, he said, his voice quiet but clear. All this time, and you never said a word. I took a breath, the cool salt air burning in my lungs, grounding me as I met his gaze. I couldn't, I said, my voice steady, even though my heart pounded. You know that now. Mom stepped closer, tears streaking down her cheeks, her hands trembling as she reached for me. Lily, she whispered, her voice breaking. Why didn't you tell us? We thought you failed. I felt something twist in my chest, the weight of every holiday spent in silence. Every meal where I swallowed my pride along with the food, every look of pity they thought I didn't see. It wasn't about what you thought, I said softly, my voice catching for a moment. It was about keeping people safe. About doing what I had to do. Dad's eyes finally lifted to meet mine, red-rimmed, his jaw tight. I spent years thinking you walked away, he said, his voice raw. Thinking you couldn't handle it. I blinked, the breeze stinging my eyes, the familiar burn of unshed tears pressing against the back of my throat. I know, I said, and I let you think that. He took another step back, shaking his head, his hands dropping to his sides. For what he demanded, pain and anger mixing in his words. For what, Lily? For missions you'll never hear about, I said, my voice low but firm. For children who got to go home, for families who didn't have to get the call that their son or daughter wasn't coming back. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing down on all of us as the families nearby pretended not to watch, their eyes flicking over curiosity and confusion on their faces. Ethan took another step forward, his hand lifting slightly before dropping again. You saved people, he said, his voice shaking. You were out there doing the work. I nodded once, unable to speak for a moment. The Admiral cleared his throat, stepping back, giving us space, but his eyes held a quiet respect as he looked at me. You have a hell of a daughter, he said to my father before turning away. Dad didn't move, didn't speak, just kept looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Mom wiped at her eyes, her hand still trembling as she reached out, brushing my hair back like she used to when I was a kid. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I swallowed, closing my eyes for a moment, letting her hand rest against my cheek, feeling the warmth I had missed for so long. It's okay, I said, even though it wasn't, even though the years couldn't be erased in a moment. Ethan stepped closer, his hand gripping my shoulder, his eyes shining. You're still my sister, he said, and I'm proud of you. The words hit me harder than I expected, loosening something in my chest I hadn't realized I was holding. I looked at him, at the trident on his chest, at the pride in his eyes. And I'm proud of you, I said. I didn't see Dad move until he was standing in front of me, his hand reaching out, hesitating before it landed on my shoulder. His eyes were glassy, his mouth tight, his hand trembling as he squeezed gently. I don't know how to process this, he admitted, his voice cracking. But I'm proud of you too, Colonel. It was the first time he had ever called me by rank, the first time he had ever seen me beyond the daughter he thought had failed. And it was the first time I saw my father's hand shake when he looked at me. Have you ever had to carry a truth alone until it broke you open? What would you have done if you were me? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. When the truth came out, silence turned into blades, cutting deep into memory. We stood in the parking lot after the ceremony, the sun dipping lower, painting everything in gold that felt too warm for how cold it was between us. Mom wiped at her eyes, her mascara smudged, her shoulders shaking as she tried to catch her breath. Why, Lily, she whispered, her voice breaking, her hands clutching each other like she was holding herself together. Why did you let us think you were a failure? I looked at her, at the lines on her face I hadn't seen before, at the pain I had caused without ever meaning to. Because I had to, I said, my voice calm but tired. Because it was the only way to do what I needed to do. Dad paced a few steps away, running a hand through his hair, letting out a breath that sounded like a curse. You don't understand, I continued, looking between them. It wasn't about you. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about protecting people, about missions that needed to stay buried for them to succeed. Mom shook her head, tears falling again, her mouth opening, closing, searching for words she couldn't find. We could have supported you, she said, finally, her voice small. No, Mom, I said softly. You couldn't. It wasn't safe. Ethan shifted beside me, his hands shoved into his uniform pockets, his eyes red. All those times He started swallowing hard. All those times I made jokes about you wasting your life, about you not having what it takes. He couldn't finish, dropping his gaze to the gravel at his feet. Ethan, I said, stepping closer, forcing him to look at me. You didn't know. None of you did. And that's how it had to be. He lifted his eyes, pain and shame swimming there, his jaw tightening. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I didn't know. I placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing it, letting him know it was okay, even if the ache in my chest said it would never fully be. Dad finally stopped pacing, turning to face me, his eyes shining in the fading light. I don't know what to say, he said, his voice rough. All these years I thought I was teaching you about service, about duty. His hand shook as he extended it toward me. And all this time you were living it, he said, his voice cracking. Colonel Halston, I'm proud of you. I took his hand, gripping it firmly, feeling the tremble, seeing the pride and regret in his eyes. It was the first time he had ever said those words to me. I held his hand for a moment, feeling the roughness of his skin, the weight of years we had both spent chasing different kinds of honor. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in a long time I saw understanding, even if it came wrapped in confusion. Mom stepped forward, placing a hand on Dad's arm before reaching for me, pulling me into a hug that felt desperate and careful at the same time. I just wish you didn't have to carry it alone, she whispered into my hair, her breath shaky, her tears warm against my neck. I closed my eyes, letting myself feel it for a moment, letting the warmth seep in, even as guilt twisted inside me. I wasn't alone, Mom, I said quietly. She pulled back just enough to look at me, confusion flashing across her tear-streaked face. I had people, I said, thinking of Riley, of the team, of the quiet nods exchanged before missions, of the hands that pulled me up when I was too tired to stand. Ethan wiped at his face with the back of his hand, clearing his throat before speaking again. What happens now? He asked, his voice uncertain. I mean, do you have to leave again? I looked at him, my little brother who had grown into a man while I was gone, who had found his own way to serve while I was serving in shadows. I don't know, I admitted, the honesty feeling heavy but clean. This changes some things, but not everything. Dad let out a breath, shaking his head with a small, rueful smile. I spent years teaching you about duty, Lily, he said, looking down for a moment before meeting my eyes again. But you were out there living it, doing more than I ever did. His hand landed on my shoulder, squeezing it with a firmness that felt like acceptance. I don't know how to be proud and angry at the same time, he said, a broken laugh slipping through. But I am. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the moment. I pulled it out, seeing Riley's name on the screen, a simple message glowing back at me. You good? I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen before I typed back. I think so, I sent. Almost immediately another message appeared. I knew you needed this. Proud of you. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, slipping the phone back into my pocket as I looked at my family standing in the golden light of the California evening, forever changed by a truth that had lived in silence for too long. But even as I stood there, their eyes finally seeing me, I knew deep down that nothing would ever be the same again. Mom stepped back, brushing at the tears on her cheeks, trying to smooth her hair like she could tuck her emotions away as easily. She looked at me with eyes that were softer now, eyes that saw me as something more than the daughter she thought she lost. Do you remember when you were little, she said, her voice unsteady, and you would line up your stuffed animals and give them orders? I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, remembering the old tan carpet in the living room, the army of stuffed bears and rabbits lined up while I stood in front, pretending I was leading them on some important mission. Yeah, I said quietly. I thought it was just a phase, she continued, shaking her head. But you were always meant for this, weren't you? I didn't know how to answer that, so I just nodded, the memory, bittersweet. The child I was, so different from the woman standing here now. Ethan stepped closer, hands still in his pockets, but his shoulders were squared, his eyes clear. Does this mean you're done? He asked, hope and fear tangled in his voice. Or are you going back? I met his gaze, seeing the brother who had once built forts with me in the backyard, who had looked up to me before the silence grew too loud between us. I don't know yet, I admitted, the truth heavy on my tongue. There's always more to do. But maybe I don't have to do it alone anymore. Dad cleared his throat, his hand still on my shoulder, squeezing once before letting go. You don't, he said firmly. Not anymore. For a moment the air around us was quiet, the sounds of the ocean in the distance, and the seagulls overhead the only noise filling the space between us. Families were beginning to leave, the ceremony over, but we stayed there, caught in a moment we all knew would change us forever. My phone buzzed again, and I pulled it out, seeing another message from Riley. Remember what I said? You did good. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard before I typed back. Thanks. Means more than you know. A breeze swept through, carrying the scent of salt and the faint trace of the eucalyptus trees nearby. I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me, grounding me in the moment, reminding me that the world kept moving even when everything inside you felt like it had stopped. Dad glanced at Ethan, then back at me. Come home for dinner, he said. Both of you. Ethan's mouth lifted into a small smile as he nodded. Yeah, Lily, he said. Come home. Home. The word tasted different now, not like something I was running from, but something I could walk toward even if the path wasn't clear yet. I slipped my phone into my pocket, looking at the family I had been protecting in silence for so long, letting them see me as I was not as who they thought I should be. And in that fragile, quiet moment, I realized they were trying too. But I knew deep down that no matter how hard we tried to go back, nothing would ever be the same again. Have you ever carried a truth so heavy it changed everything the moment it was spoken? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Recognition doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it's just a look. Mom set the table with the good plates, the ones with the blue rim we only used for birthdays and holidays. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic filled the kitchen while the evening light poured through the window, catching on the framed photos of Mason in uniform that lined the hallway. It was supposed to be a small dinner to celebrate Ethan's pinning, a moment for the family to gather to honor him and what he had achieved. But now the air was different, thicker with something unspoken, something seen that could never be unseen. Dad hovered near the fridge, a beer in his hand, glancing at me every so often like he was still trying to find the right words. Mom hummed quietly, wiping down the counters even though they were already clean, her shoulders tight with nervous energy. Ethan walked in from the backyard, sliding the screen door shut, the breeze carrying in the scent of cut grass. He gave me a look, a small nod, his eyes clear, steady, a silent promise that whatever came next we were in it together. We sat down, plates filled, hands reaching for bread, the small clatter of forks and knives the only noise for a moment. Dad cleared his throat, raising his glass. To Ethan, he said, his voice firm but softer than usual. For earning your place, for honoring the family, and for reminding us what service means. Ethan raised his glass, his eyes flicking to me before he spoke. And to Lily, he added, his voice calm, sure. For teaching me what it really means to serve. Mom's breath caught her hand brushing against mine under the table, her fingers squeezing gently. We clinked glasses, the sound sharp in the quiet, and for a moment it felt like everything was exactly where it needed to be. After dinner, I stepped outside, letting the cool air hit my skin, the sky painted in streaks of pink and purple as the sun sank below the horizon. I heard the screen door slide open, footsteps on the porch. I have to go, Ethan said, standing beside me, hands in his pockets. Early, PT. I nodded, smiling. Be safe, I said. He glanced at me, the corner of his mouth lifting. You too, he said, and I knew he meant it in ways most people wouldn't understand. The porch light flickered on as he left, the soft hum of crickets filling the silence around me. I sat down on the steps, letting the quiet settle, letting myself breathe. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, seeing Riley's name on the screen. Coffee, his message read. I typed back, a small smile pulling at my lips. Yeah, I sent. Tomorrow. The screen dimmed and I slipped the phone away, leaning back, letting the breeze brush against my face, feeling for the first time in a long time that I wasn't running anymore. The next morning, I met Riley at a small coffee shop near the marina, the kind with old wooden floors and the scent of espresso clinging to the air. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching on the dust motes that danced above the counter. Riley was already there, leaning back in his chair, a cup of black coffee in front of him, steam rising in slow curls. He looked the same as always, calm, steady, with eyes that missed nothing. You look like you finally slept, he said, nodding toward the chair across from him. Maybe a little, I replied, dropping into the seat, wrapping my hands around the warm cup the barista had handed me. We sat there for a moment, the sounds of milk steaming and soft conversation around us, the world moving on while we held onto this small, quiet space. So he said, tapping the side of his cup. They know. They know, I echoed, letting the words settle. And you're still standing, he said, a small smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Barely, I said. He nodded, taking a sip of coffee before setting it down, his eyes meeting mine. It's time, Lily, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Time to live as yourself, even if you still have to stay quiet about the details. I looked out the window, watching the boats rock in the marina, the sails catching the morning breeze. I don't know if I know how to do that, I admitted, my voice low. You do, he said. You've always known. I took a breath, letting it out slowly, the warmth of the coffee grounding me. I got a call last night, I said, glancing at him. His eyebrow lifted slightly. They're moving me up, I said. Brigadier General. A slow smile spread across his face, pride lighting in his eyes. About damn time, he said. I can't tell them, I said, the ache in my chest, pressing hard. They can't come to the ceremony. They don't need to, he said, leaning forward. They know enough now. That's what matters. I nodded, blinking hard, feeling the weight of the years, the missions, the silence, and the sacrifice pressing down on me and lifting at the same time. We sat there a while longer, talking about nothing and everything, letting the morning pass us by as the sun climbed higher. That night, I stood on the balcony of my small apartment looking out at the lights of San Diego, the glow reflecting on the water, the hum of the city, a steady comfort. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, holding a cup of tea, letting the steam warm my face as I breathed it in. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding who I was from the people who mattered. For the first time, I wasn't carrying it alone. I let a small smile slip onto my lips, letting the quiet wash over me, letting the weight lift piece by piece. And for the first time, I felt peace. Have you ever been misjudged by your family because they didn't know who you truly were? Share your story in the comments. I want to hear it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.